Reform thinking.
Welcome back to the deep dive. When we talk about morality, I think most people, their minds immediately go to a list of prohibitions.
Mm-hmm. A fence.
Exactly, a fence built to keep them away from anything fun. Our mission today is to take a stack of classic source material, mainly C.S. Lewis's essay, The Three Parts of Morality, and do a really rigorous study of what morality actually is.
Almost like an engineering study.
Yeah, we're going beneath the surface of don't do that to look at the operational structure of human life.
It's so necessary to reframe the whole conversation. I mean, if we stay at that level of just boundaries, we miss the point completely.
Completely.
Lewis gives us a framework that organizes the moral life into three essential interconnected areas. It moves way beyond just prohibitions and focuses on, well, design and functionality.
It's the difference between reading a traffic law and reading a blueprint for a functioning engine, isn't it?
That's a great way to put it.
And that structural thinking is exactly what we need. We're not here to talk about what the rules are, but why they exist in the first place and, how they all relate to one another.
Right.
So let's unpack this. If we visualize human existence individually, collectively, as this highly complex machine, we have to address two foundational questions that Lewis puts out there right away.
Okay.
What are the directions for operating this human machine? And what's the intended destination of the whole system?
Thinking of morality as engineering, it immediately shifts the goalposts. We're looking at human existence as a mechanism that's designed for a specific use, and it requires following a fixed set of operating parameters. The success or failure of your life, in this context, it's not about subjective happiness.
Yeah.
It's a measure of whether the machine is running efficiently and, achieving what it was designed to do.
And we start that analysis right here with Section 1.
Oh.
Morality as operating directions for the human machine.
Let's do it.
Lewis opens with this, just a perfect anecdote. It illustrates the popular misconception so well. He tells the story of a schoolboy.
Mm-hmm.
And the boy's asked about God. And he describes him as the sort of person who is always snooping around to see if anyone is enjoying himself and then trying to stop it.
And that's it, isn't it? That's the view.
It's so widespread that morality is this interfering, joy-sapping force. It's what we inherit culturally.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns morality into this game of, dodging the rules or just grudgingly following them because you're afraid of getting caught.
And that view fails because it misidentifies the nature of the rule maker and just as much the purpose of the rules.
Right.
The source cuts through this so quickly by stating the core analogy. Moral rules are directions for running the human machine.
Directions, not restrictions.
Exactly. They're not arbitrary rules designed to curtail your pleasure or enjoyment. They're there strictly to, and this is the key, prevent a breakdown or a strain or a friction in the operation of that mechanism.
Like a maintenance schedule.
It is. If you bought a high-performance vehicle, the manual isn't trying to annoy you. It's making sure you get the full designed performance out of the machine without, a catastrophic failure.
And what's so interesting is how we readily accept this for physical machines, but we fight it tooth and nail for our own moral lives.
We do.
An engineer tells me, don't use low-grade fuel in this engine. I accept it. It's a practical constraint. But when morality says, don't lie, we often see that as this oppressive restriction on my freedom.
But the source argues they're essentially the same thing. They're both instructions for optimal operation.
Right.
And the analogy helps us understand why moral rules so often seem to interfere with our immediate natural inclinations. Our inclinations, in this metaphor, are the impulses of the untrained user.
The person who just wants to push all the buttons.
Yeah. I mean, when you're being taught how to use any complicated machine, the instructor is constantly saying, no, don't do it like that, even if that feels easier or quicker or, more natural to the novice.
So give us an example of that natural inclination trap in the moral sphere.
Well, think about the natural urge to retaliate when someone slights you, or to hoard resources when you feel insecure, or to shift blame when you make a mistake.
Sure. All very powerful feelings.
Very. And they feel intuitively correct in the moment. They feel natural. But, as the source points out, the natural way of treating the machine often just doesn't work.
Okay.
If you follow that natural impulse of anger, you introduce friction into the social parts of the machine. That's part one. If you follow the natural impulse of, say, sloth, you introduce strain into the internal parts of the machine, part two.
The genius of Lewis's framing here is that it just refutes the whole idea that moral life is about sacrificing your well-being for some external law.
Yeah.
He's insisting that every moral rule is, in a way, self-serving.
It is, in the sense that following it prevents damage to the self.
Right.
So the initial takeaway here is just structural and practical. Morality is practical engineering, not theoretical prohibition. Every failure to follow the directions causes trouble.
And not just for other people.
No. That trouble is probably experienced by others, yes, but the source is clear that it is certainly going to cause trouble to oneself. We see the internal costs of transgression all the time.
Like what?
The anxiety of deceit, the corrosion of your integrity from all those habitual minor compromises, the internal instability that's caused by unchecked desire. These are forms of moral friction, and they compound over time.
So it's the difference between doing what feels immediately good and doing what actually aligns with the machine's design. And since the machine is me, I'm the one who ends up paying the highest long-term maintenance cost.
Exactly. And this structural understanding that moral law is an objective operational necessity is why Lewis then transitions directly into arguing against using the word ideals.
Yeah.
Because if morality is objective engineering, then calling it a mere ideal is, well, it's intellectual malpractice.
Which brings us directly to Section 2, the danger of moral idealism. Lewis spends a lot of time critiquing the language of ideals versus rules and obedience. Why quibble over terminology? I mean, it seems a bit semantic.
It seems that way, but he treats this choice of words as a genuine moral hazard.
Okay.
He recognizes that ideal is true in one sort of benign sense. He acknowledges that moral perfection, a human machine running absolutely without a single friction or strain, is an ideal because, well, we can't achieve
We're
it.
all imperfect operators.
Right. It's like driving a car perfectly or drawing a perfectly geometrically flawless straight line. Perfect moral behavior is unattainable for us in this life. So in that sense, as unattainable perfection, calling it an ideal is, accurate.
But that's the benign sense. He's worried about the misleading sense.
The one that relates to subjectivity and private taste, yes, that's the dangerous slippage in the language. When a person calls a garden or a piece of art or even a spouse my ideal, what do they mean?
They mean it's what they like, a personal taste.
A private, subjective taste that's attractive to them, but not something everyone else has to share or live up to. In matters of aesthetics, we can hold different ideals. You might prefer minimalism. I might prefer something more ornate. Both are fine.
The danger, then, is transferring that subjective flavor of the word ideal to the moral law. If I say honesty is my moral ideal, I'm sort of implying that it's just a personal aspiration.
An optional lifestyle choice you happen to favor.
Exactly. And not a universal operating requirement that's prescribed by the very nature of humanity.
And that, Lewis argues, is a disastrous mistake. Because perfect behavior is not a matter of private taste. It is a necessary ideal prescribed for all men by the very nature of the human machine.
So it's not about personal flavor. It's about operating within objective design parameters.
Going back to our analogy, perfect gear changing or proper oil levels are ideals prescribed for all drivers by the nature of cars, not by one driver's private preference for engine longevity.
This means that if moral behavior is objective, then failure isn't just a lapse in personal preference. It's a violation of the machine's design. And this leads us straight into what you call the Prague warning. Lewis details the danger of thinking of yourself as a person of high ideals, just because you strive to avoid all lies instead of, only a few, or you try never to cheat instead of only now and then.
The problem with the language of idealism is that it feeds self-congratulation.
Now, sir.
If you view morality as an optional ideal, then every step you take toward it feels like some kind of extra credit achievement that deserves applause. You become a prig, believing you are a special person who deserves congratulations on your idealism.
The error is mistaking fundamental maintenance for heroic effort.
That's it, exactly.
I always struggled with why Lewis used such harsh language against ideals, but now I see it. It's not about being unaspirational. It's about neutralizing that self-congratulation and just demanding compliance with objective design. If I manage to tell the truth for a whole week, I shouldn't think, look how morally superior I am. I should just recognize, okay, I've operated the communication circuits of the human machine correctly as they were intended.
Precisely. And this shifting perspective is so crucial, especially today, where moral identity is often treated like a brand or a source of self-esteem instead of a functional requirement.
So if you succeed in avoiding moral friction, you haven't earned a medal.
You've simply avoided self-inflicted damage.
To push that analogy a bit further, is Lewis suggesting that societal systems are always limited by the moral capacity of the people running them, no matter how well the system is designed?
We'll get into that more in part 3, but yes, the short answer is that the language of ideals makes morality optional. And if it's optional, its widespread practice is unstable.
So he prefers rules and obedience.
Because those terms acknowledge the objective necessity of the law. And this is perfectly demonstrated by his arithmetic analogy.
Okay, let's spend some time with the arithmetic analogy because it's a really high-value insight that I think often gets glossed over.
Okay, think about a long, complicated calculation. You might as well expect to be congratulated for trying to get the sum quite right. Now, of course, perfect arithmetic isn't ideal. We all make mistakes in calculations sometimes.
Yeah.
But what is your approach when you're actually doing the math?
My approach is to try to be accurate at each step because I know that one mistake early on will make the entire final answer worthless.
Exactly. There's nothing exceptional about trying to be quite accurate at each step. It's just what any rational person attempting the calculation must do. In fact, it would be idiotic not to try, because every single mistake in the arithmetic is going to cause trouble later.
It could cause the whole project built on that math to collapse.
It will.
So applying that to morality, every failure, every lapse in discipline, every act of selfishness or minor dishonesty is a calculation error. It causes friction, yes, but more dangerously, it changes the foundational integrity of the person.
And the cost compounds exponentially. A single lie might feel trivial, a minor calculation error. But if that lie is built on by other rationalizations and by the internal adjustment you have to make to maintain the lie, that slight friction turns into systemic failure.
So the person who allows themselves these minor calculation errors in their character eventually builds a faulty structure.
A structure that cannot bear any serious weight.
And sticking to the terms rules and obedience rather than ideals and idealism helps us avoid this intellectual and spiritual error. It forces us to see that compliance isn't a badge of honor, it's basic, necessary functionality.
It's what's required to maintain our individual integrity and avoid compounding the errors that will eventually define us.
That's a powerful reframing of the moral life. And this analysis of rules and obedience, it naturally brings us to the architecture of moral failure. Now that we understand what the rules are, operating directions, we need to see where the human machine goes wrong. So we move to section 3, the 3 parts of morality visualized through the fleet and the band.
This is Lewis's comprehensive framework. He suggests that moral failure happens in 2 distinct ways within the system, and those 2 ways are entirely directed by a third overarching consideration.
And he uses the analogy of a fleet of ships sailing in formation.
Or a band playing a tune, yes. It helps visualize this interdependency. If you want a successful voyage or a successful concert, all 3 parts have to be working.
Let's start with part 1. This is the most recognizable dimension of morality, harmony between individuals.
Right. Part 1 is defined as fair play and harmony between individuals. It's morality as external behavior, preventing collisions, cheating, bullying.
In the fleet analogy, this is just the ships not running into one another.
And maintaining a clean lane.
Yeah.
In the band analogy, it's each player coming in at the right moment so they combine correctly with all the others.
And this is where most contemporary moral discussion just stops. When we talk about improving society, we talk about part 1, kindness, fair play between nations, classes, individuals.
It's the application of morality to the social sphere. And it's the obvious starting point because the immediate results of failure here are so visible.
War, economic injustice, corruption.
Shoddy workmanship. And importantly, part 1 is where there is the least disagreement. Almost all people, whatever their deeper beliefs are, they agree in theory that human beings ought to be honest and kind and helpful to one another.
But Lewis warns that if our thinking stops at part 1, we might just as well not have thought at all. Why is part 1 alone so insufficient?
Because it's treating the symptom, not the cause. You can issue all the traffic rules you want for the ships, but if the ships themselves are fundamentally unsound, the rules are useless. We have to go on to the second thing.
Which is part 2.
The tidying up inside each human being.
Part 2, tidying up inside the individual. The internal health, the seaworthiness of the individual human machine. How is that defined?
This refers to what goes wrong inside the person. When your faculties and your desires drift apart, or they interfere, or they conflict, it's the restoration of order within the self.
And in the analogy.
Part 2 is ensuring each ship is truly seaworthy, that her engines and rudder are in good working order. In the band, it means each player's individual instrument must be perfectly in tune. If the trombone is flat or the violin is sharp, the whole concert is compromised.
Even if they time their entries perfectly, which is part one.
Right.
That makes the system totally interconnected. So you can't successfully have part one without part two. It sounds like collisions damage seaworthiness, and poor seaworthiness guarantees future collisions.
It's a feedback loop. If the ships constantly collide, their hulls won't remain intact, so that damages part two. But the most critical element is that if the internal steering gears, your internal mechanisms of discipline and self-control, if they're broken, the ship cannot be steered to avoid collisions, no matter how well the captain knows the part one rules.
This directly challenges that common modern mindset that often justifies behavior by saying, well, it can't be wrong because it doesn't do anyone else any immediate harm,
That person is thinking only of part one.
not damaging the next ship.
And they're completely forgetting part two, what their own ship is like inside. Lewis's critique is so sharp here, he asks. What is the good of telling the ships how to steer to avoid collisions if in fact they are crazy old tubs that cannot be steered at all?
Because they're driven by greed or cowardice or ill temper.
Or self-conceit, yes.
I can hear a modern listener pushing back on this, saying, but isn't part two inherently subjective? How can we objectively define the in-tune state of a human mind, given all the diverse temperaments and cultures?
That's a fair challenge, and it's why the engineering analogy is so strong. Lewis would argue that the moral law, like physical law, is objective because it's based on the design of the human machine. The in-tune state is the state of a person whose desires and will are properly oriented and disciplined.
Serving the larger necessary functions.
Right. Greed, for instance, isn't a moral ideal. It's a design flaw that hijacks the steering system. It prevents the machine from carrying out its primary function, which is harmonious interaction. Part one.
So we can draw up perfect social rules, perfect economic systems, whatever, but if our internal components, our characters, are fundamentally flawed, we will find a way to break the system.
Absolutely. Lewis acknowledges we ought to think hard about social and economic improvement. We should be designing better systems for part one. But he argues that all this systemic thinking is just moonshine unless we realize that nothing but the courage, self-control, and unselfishness of individuals is ever going to make any system work properly.
You cannot make men good by law.
You can't.
And we see historical examples of this constantly. Utopian movements fail not because the blueprints were flawed, but because the individuals implementing them found new ways for their old flaws. Envy, ambition, sloth, to just resurface and corrupt the structure.
Right. A new law might remove one particular kind of graft, but if men are fundamentally corrupt, they just find a new way of carrying on the old game under the new system.
Without seaworthy men, you can't have a good society. That is why morality has to progress inward to part two. We have to fix the individual ship.
But Lewis cautions us not to stop there, because if we fix the ship without knowing its purpose, we might as well not have started at all. We have to proceed to the third most expansive and challenging part of the framework.
Okay, so let's move to section 4, the general purpose and relations to the maker. This is where the whole operation is given its ultimate meaning and where the conversation shifts from ethics to metaphysics.
It has to.
The third part is the general purpose of human life as a whole. It asks the ultimate design question. What was man made for? What course ought the whole fleet to be on?
What tune does the conductor want the band to play?
Right.
This is the destination analogy. The individual instruments might be in tune, part two, and they might combine at the right moment, part one, but the whole performance is still a failure if they were hired to play dance music and they actually played nothing but dead marches.
The fleet's voyage fails if the ships are in perfect formation and seaworthy, but they arrive at Calcutta when the mission was New York. And this is where the differences between Christian and non-Christian morality become really serious. I mean, up until now, Lewis has mostly provided a kind of moral geometry that a non-believer could conceptually agree with.
They could, but the third part involves statements about facts that have to be either true or false.
And these factual statements about the universe's origin, the nature of man, his lifespan, they determine the right sailing of the fleet.
Yes, if you believe the universe is purely material and accidental, then the ultimate purpose of the fleet is subjective. It's tied only to temporary social contracts. The destination is self-chosen. But if you believe the universe was created and launched by a specific power with a specific mission, the destination is fixed and objective.
And that distinction, objective purpose versus subjective purpose, it changes the entire moral code. If I'm sailing aimlessly, I can change my rules mid-voyage. If I'm sailing to a fixed point, the rules for my speed, my direction, my payload, they become non-negotiable.
And this leads us to the crucial landlord-tenant distinction, which addresses ownership.
This really grounds the morality of Part 2.
It does. When a person says, it cannot be wrong unless it hurts some other human being, they understand their Part 1 duty. Not damaging the other ships, but they honestly think what they do to their own ship, Part 2, is simply their own business.
And modern ethics is often built on that assumption of absolute self-ownership. My body, my mind, my time, they're mine to use or abuse as I see fit, as long as I don't violate Part 1.
The question of ownership just demolishes that view. It makes a huge difference whether the machine, my body and mind, is my own property, the landlord, or if I am only a tenant responsible to the real landlord.
If I'm the landlord, then I can run my ship into the ground, fill it with junk, whatever. It's my private business. It's my right.
But if somebody else, the maker, made me for their own sovereign purposes, I have intrinsic, non-negotiable duties that would simply not exist if I just belonged to myself.
This completely reframes stewardship.
Precisely. The concept of tenancy transforms our resources, our time, our bodies into assets we are responsible for managing according to the maker's lease agreement.
This is where the core tenets of Reformed thought just naturally align with Lewis's framework.
They do. If God is the sovereign creator, then we are stewards, not owners. Duties like reverence, worship, spiritual discipline, and avoiding specific sins against the body, they become immediately required of us.
Not because they're pleasant or socially useful.
No, but because they are required by the terms of the lease.
Let's dedicate some time to the practical moral implications of tenancy. If my time isn't my own property, the moral status of sloth or of wasting my talents, it shifts, doesn't it? It goes from being a self-improvement issue to being a failure of stewardship.
Absolutely. Consider time management. If I'm the landlord, wasting an hour is just a lost personal opportunity. If I'm a tenant, that hour belongs to the real landlord, and I've wasted resources that were entrusted to me. The accountability changes from internal regret to external duty.
The same applies to our physical health.
Yes. It's not just about looking good or feeling good. It's about maintaining the instrument the owner requires for his service. This deepens Part 2 dramatically. Tidying up inside isn't for self-actualization. It's for proper, functional service to the maker.
That is a fundamental challenge to secular assumptions about freedom and economy. And Part 3 also deals with the question of immortality and its consequences.
A huge one.
Christianity asserts that every individual human being is going to live forever. This has to be taken as a factual statement, either true or false, that just changes everything.
This assertion radically alters the calculus of moral choice. It pushes the time horizon out to infinity. There are many moral struggles, things like bad temper, self-pity, petty jealousy, that wouldn't be worth agonizing over if you were only going to live 70 years.
You could just rationalize them as minor character quirks that will soon vanish with death.
Right. But if you're going to live forever, those seemingly small flaws have to be bothered about very seriously.
Oh, why?
Because character, once it's formed, it seems to accumulate and reinforce itself. Character traits, virtues, or vices are habits. They are the grooves that the human machine carves into its own mechanisms. In a 70-year span, the worsening in vices might be so gradual that you don't really notice it. We see ourselves getting a little crankier, a little lazier, a little more jealous, but we just think, oh, I'm just getting old.
But if you project that gradual worsening, that deepening of the groove of vice over 1,000,000 years, the result is staggering. The friction, the strain, the breakdown, it just compounds without end.
Lewis states that the end result of that unchecked, increasing moral decay might be absolute hell in 1,000,000 years. In fact, if Christianity is true, hell is the precisely correct technical term for what it would be.
Wow.
And it's crucial to understand this not as some arbitrary punitive invention, but as the natural, inevitable outcome of an individual machine that is perpetually choosing breakdown and friction. And that choice is then solidified by everlasting duration. It's character achieving its final, unchangeable state.
That's a staggering realization. Immortality transforms these small failures from temporary inconveniences into permanent defining conditions. It makes the battle for Part 2, tidying up inside, the most consequential activity possible.
And furthermore, immortality makes another huge difference that connects back to Part 1. the value of the individual versus the state.
Okay.
If individuals live only 70 years, then a state or a nation or a civilization which might last for 1,000 years is logically considered more significant than the individual. The collective goal outweighs the temporary existence of the person.
So in that secular short lifespan view, the individual becomes expendable for the greater, longer-lasting collective.
And this justifies all sorts of political philosophies that prioritize the state's survival above individual dignity or rights.
But if Christianity is true,
The individual is incomparably more significant. Why? Because the individual is everlasting. The life of a state or a civilization, when you compare it with the duration of the individual soul, is only a moment. You are permanent. The civilization is temporary.
this provides a deep grounding for the unique value of the person that's inherent in the Christian perspective. It elevates the importance of saving one's own ship, Part 2, and the dignity of every other individual ship, Part 1, above the fleeting concerns of temporal power structures.
The individual is not a means to a collective end. The individual is the end.
That's why any moral thinking that neglects Part 3, the ultimate destination and relationship to the maker, is just doomed to instability.
It is. If we don't know the purpose of the machine and the duration of its lifespan, we can never define the operating rules, Part 2, correctly, which in turn means we can never achieve social harmony, Part 1, permanently.
You have to consider all three departments.
Relations between man, things inside each man, and relations between man and the power that made him.
And the ultimate message is that you can't truly grasp morality without accounting for all three levels of functional design, especially the objective purpose assigned by the designer.
So our deep dive into Lewis's structure, it really offers a clear blueprint for functional existence. The key takeaway for you, the learner, is synthesis. Morality is a mechanism. To ignore the second part, the internal condition of the individual ship, or the third part, the ultimate purpose and destination, is to guarantee failure in the first part, social harmony.
You can never achieve Part 1 successfully with failing components in Part 2 and a misunderstood mission in Part 3.
Never.
And that's the application point we should probably dwell on. We should consider which of the three parts we or our society most frequently neglect. I mean, when you hear advice on social improvement, does it stop at the surface? Does it focus only on rules for avoiding collision?
That's part one thinking.
Or does it address the seaworthiness of the individual ship, the internal maintenance of character?
And moreover, does that advice ever question the destination? Without the third part, we are simply rearranging deck chairs on ships that might be sailing toward the wrong Calcutta.
Or playing a perfectly tuned instrument in a band that's playing a dirge when it was commissioned to play a waltz.
Right. The entire effort, no matter how well it's executed, is wasted if the purpose is misidentified.
So if every moral failure is a calculation error, as we established early on, what systemic trouble are our collective minor failures causing today? And how much is that trouble compounded by the fact that we're everlasting beings? If hell is the technical term for moral decay prolonged indefinitely, that every seemingly insignificant internal failure is a design flaw that requires immediate radical attention, not self-congratulatory idealism.
And finally, a provocative thought for you to carry forward. Revisit that framework of duty and ownership. Consider what duties you might hold right now simply because you are not the landlord of your own being.
If your existence is a tenancy.
What are the terms of the lease that apply to your time, your resources, your self-control, and your attention? That change in framework from owner to steward changes everything about how we approach the moral life.
We'll pick up this conversation next time as we continue our study of Lewis's moral framework.